and welcome to the 2018 Informs Government and Analytics Summit. I'm glad you're all here. I'm Melissa Moore, Executive Director of Informs, the professional society for operations research and analytics. Over 12,000 women and men doing incredible work to save lives, save money, and solve problems since the inception of the profession in World War II. Today, we have an exciting and informative program that for many of you will be your first introduction to operations research and analytics, and the valuable ways that it helps government and elsewhere other leaders make better decisions and create and expand programs and services in the best, most efficient and effective manner. We have a wonderful program full of information, and it is going to be quite exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. After our keynote sessions by Secretary Foxx and General Hayden, we will convene our panel sessions on transportation, national security, and healthcare. After the panel sessions, we encourage you and hope you will stay for lunch to network with each other, our panels of experts, and with some of our team. In a few moments, you'll be hearing from Laura Albert, who is the chair of this event. Thank you, Laura. She is also a member of the Informs board and an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But to start and to kick off and set up this whole event, I'd like to begin with a brief video.
What is compassionate? What is imaginative? What is human? What are all of those things? Operations research and analytics. They offer limitless possibilities for us to tackle challenges, great and small, to innovate in ways that once upon a time were fiction and fantasy. But this is not the stuff of wild imaginations or distant, far-off ideas. They're proven scientific and mathematical processes, studying and analyzing complex systems, turning data into information, transforming information into insights, yielding new ideas and inspiring actions that save lives, save money, and solve problems. Operations research and analytics fuel our passion to explore, to forge new solutions to timeless puzzles, propel us toward a finish line we'll never see, and spark our determination to give our children a better world and a brighter future. What is compassionate? What is imaginative? What is resoundingly human? Operations research and analytics.
All right. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I hope the video you saw sparked your interest and curiosity about operations research and analytics and today's event. My name is Laura Albert, and I'm the chair of today's event and also a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We have an exciting agenda for you today, including 2 keynote speakers from Secretary Anthony Foxx and General Michael Hayden, and panels on national security, transportation, and healthcare with a few Informs members who are experts in these areas. Before we hear from our distinguished speakers, I want to give you a quick non-technical overview of what operations research, or OR as we call it, and analytics are, and what you can do with them. If I had to describe what we do in 3 words, I would say we improve systems. So a system is a set of things. It could be people, troops, operating rooms, trains, or whatever, that are interconnected in a way that they produce their own behavior over time. For example, a single car is just a vehicle, but a collection of cars can be a traffic jam. I have a picture of a slinky here to represent that if we change one aspect of the system, it has ripple effects, and it may change every other aspect in the system. And we have the tools to manage this. Operations research started as a discipline in World War II. Operations research techniques were used to help the war effort in many ways. OR was used to develop barrier patrols to support anti-submarine warfare, to improve the probability of detection with very limited resources. OR also evaluated ways to improve bombing runs, and it increased the accuracy of these bombing runs by fourfold over the course of the war. Operations research came of age after World War II. Algorithmic and computational advances led to the ability to solve large-scale resource allocation problems, such as how to cost-effectively move supplies to troops over a transportation network. Many OR solutions at this time focused on improving efficiency in transportation problems. Operations research became a discipline in the 1950s, and we never looked back. The mathematical tools we had to cost-effectively move supplies and troops around the world to support military operations have proven to have many other uses and benefits. Oops. Today, OR is used in many applications. In national security and military logistics, we design checkpoint screening procedures, we assign federal air marshals to flights, and we study how to protect critical infrastructure. In transportation, we schedule commercial airline flights and their crews, and we help you get to where you need to go when there's weather that wreaks havoc on your best laid plans. In healthcare, we schedule doctors, nurses, and interns so you're not kept waiting when it's your turn for an appointment. We help your treatment team make personalized, data-driven decisions to tailor to your specific conditions and medical history, and we inform preparedness decisions in the face of possible pandemic disease. We are at the forefront of many emerging application areas, such as the shared economy, where we design bike-sharing networks to ensure that there's always a bike waiting for you when you need it. These tools have made a real difference over the years. Yet for many, including probably many of you, there's little awareness of operations research and analytics and how they save lives, save money, and solve problems. What you'll hear today and learn is just the tip of the iceberg. To guide you in today's event, I want to let you in on a little secret. There are a few common principles for knowing when to use operations research and analytics, and I want to share what these principles are. In a nutshell, we are efficiency experts, and we know how to manage limited resources so you get the best possible performance with what you have. Systems that have limited resources often have queues or congestion, so you may see customers waiting in line, patients or trains in lines or at choke points. We study systems with limited resources and capacities. There's only so many seats on an airplane or so many operating rooms, and sometimes it's impossible to handle just one more patient or customer. Our tools work well when there are time delays due to travel, processing, or information. So we understand how to sequence the test results at hospitals and deal with shipping delays. And of course, there's uncertainty about what will happen next. We may have a goal for what we're doing, which usually involves efficiency, but from the outside, it may look like we have a dial that we just dial up or dial down efficiency. But if we look under the hood, we see a different picture. What we're actually doing is applying advanced analytical methods to manage an interconnected system with its limited resources and its uncertainty to improve the performance. You may be wondering where data analytics fit in. The fact is, operations research is increasingly data-driven. We recognize that data are just data. Data do not directly help us design systems, solve problems, or save money. It's what we do with the data that makes all the difference. We like to think of a spectrum, analytics as a spectrum that takes us from data to insight to decision. And this distinguishes what we do from some of our peers in data science. If we start with data, we may ask questions about what happened and why, and we can look into the past a little bit and apply statistics and machine learning methodologies to gain some insight. We could ask what will happen and use forecasting and simulation tools to look slightly into the future. And we can also finally ask, what should we do? Which is really focusing on the decision and designing a better system. And we may use optimization and simulation. And when we do this, we have a better system, and we're very forward-looking. And I have the slinky here to remind you that we are fully capturing all the interconnections in a system, not just looking at a single piece of the puzzle. Before I wrap up, I want to discuss two examples. I do research in public policy in the areas of emergency response and homeland security. And my research in emergency medical services focuses on delivering ambulances, in this case, to patients in the quickest amount of time. Ultimately, the goal is to improve response times, which is mostly a travel time from when the ambulance is sent to when it arrives at the scene. And you would think the way to improve response times would be to always send the closest ambulance, but it's not. The system in this case spans space and time, and decisions are made under uncertainty when a 911 call is first placed. And there's imperfect information is usually available at that call. And that decision is made with that imperfect information. And what happens is that how the system responds to that patient that's just called 911 affects the response to later patients that enter the system, because that initial ambulance sent is unavailable for the next patient that arrives. So the solution is to design response protocols that manages these issues by thinking ahead and ensuring that the most critical ambulances are available for the most critical patients. While our goal, again, here we have our dial here, is to improve response times, what we're actually doing under the hood is focusing on designing response district and thinking systematically about reducing response times for most patients in the system. UPS is another example. UPS uses operations research and analytics to move packages around the world from customer to customer. UPS won the 2016 Franz Edelman Award for Achievement in Operations Research in the Management Sciences for its Orion system that optimizes driver routes for each one of their shifts. This system helps them better deliver packages, and it optimizes their schedule for the day. It's hard to do by hand for many reasons. One of the particularly difficult challenges is that so many packages need to be dropped off or picked up at specific times. And if the drivers were put in charge, they might arrive at the wrong time quite often. But this kind of flexibility keeps UPS's customers happy and also creates a challenge for managing their system. UPS developed Orion to achieve both objectives. Orion gives each driver a route for the day, and it's very data-driven. And the driver can then customize it based on some of their preferences. You may have seen some of the press about Orion that reported how they were saving money by reducing left turns. Well, that was only part of the story. UPS saves about $300 million a year with Orion by building efficient routes that reduce the miles driven, and it also contributes to sustainability by reducing carbon dioxide emissions. We live in a highly interconnected world, a large and multifaceted system, if you will. For those in the public policy arena, operations research and analytics have offered proven ways for the government to operate and deliver services more efficiently and more effectively, even in these increasingly complex times. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Ramaya Krishnan, Inform's President-elect and Dean of the College of Information Systems and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome, Krishnan.
Thank you, Laura. That was a fabulous overview and introduction. Hello, everybody. Good morning. There are two things I want you to remember from Laura's presentation. Keep in mind the slinky. What a cool thing to keep in mind. All the interconnections that exist, and the others about saving lives, saving money, and solving problems. So those are the two things we want you to keep in mind as you spend the day with us today. Laura spoke of complex systems a few minutes ago. And while there are many great examples of these types of systems, one that we are focused on today, this morning, is transportation. And the Orion example was one such example. So from our roads and highways to air and rail, the advent of new modes of transit and the integration between different communities, our transportation infrastructure is indeed a complex system. And new technologies are propelling us in new directions. I mean, so we hear about air taxis now that are being considered. And that few of us could have imagined just a generation ago. Few people have been at the forefront of this change as our first keynote speaker this morning, Secretary Anthony Foxx. Secretary Foxx was the 17th United States Secretary of Transportation and the former mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina. As Secretary of Transportation, Anthony Foxx led an agency with more than 55,000 employees and a budget of $70 billion. Secretary Foxx was confirmed by a rare 100-0 Senate vote, indicative of his demonstrated ability to bridge gaps in an era of deep partisan divide. Secretary Foxx created an ambitious program to modernize America and pressed Congress to pass the first long-term surface transportation bill in more than a decade. He also energized the DOT's embrace of innovation by launching the Smart City Challenge. I have personal experience with this in that we helped at Carnegie Mellon, worked with the city of Pittsburgh, and actually took part in the Smart City Challenge, was a finalist, and it turned out that Columbus, Ohio, where Nick Hall is at, our president's at, was the winner of that Smart City Challenge, which was a national competition to implement bold, data-driven ideas to make transportation safer, easier, and more reliable in that city. He also has published Beyond Traffic, a report on the challenges American infrastructure will face over the next 3 decades, refocusing the national dialogue on the picture of transportation infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Secretary Anthony Foxx.
Krishnan, thank you so much. Laura, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. It's great to be here at Informs. I want to say just at the outset how grateful I am, not only as a former public official, but also as a member of the public, that we have people whose lives are dedicated to helping us make our systems work better. And I think today's mission, our goal today, is to maybe share a little bit of what science there is behind improving systems with folks who are practitioners or public policy leaders to try to help bridge the understanding and the gaps between those. And I hope that in talking to you today, you get the sense that, number one, I would have been thrown out of getting a PhD in any of this. But number two, that even someone off the street as the mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, or someplace can understand the impact and the value of data and operations research on improving our systems. And I was thinking about how to explain my connection to this, and it occurred to me that I had a very interesting situation when I was the mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, that really opened my eyes a little bit. We had a very congested 4-lane road in the middle of our city. And our traffic engineers had been trying to figure out for years and years how to decongest this road. And so one day the engineers came to my office and they said, we should reduce the number of lanes from 4 to 3 and we'll get more traffic through. And I said, you gotta be out of your mind. I practice transportation by addition, not subtraction. How in the world can we even imagine a 3-lane road getting more throughput than a 4-lane road? So the engineer listened to me for a few minutes and allowed me to kind of get my emotions out of the conversation. And then he explained. He said, look, we've done manual traffic studies, and I'll get to that in a minute. We've done manual traffic studies The problem we have on this road is that you have people on the right lanes who are trying to make left-hand turns. And so they're trying to merge into the left lane to turn left. And then you have people in the left lane already who are trying to turn left, and the traffic just gets backed up and backed up and backed up. He said if we create a middle lane that's a turn lane, and you have the outside lanes as through lanes, not only can we get more throughput of cars, we can actually add bike lanes, we can add pedestrian safety areas, and it's just going to be a better street. So we spent the next 3 or 4 months going through a public input process, and the public was as exercised as I had been in our private meeting. But ultimately, we were able to make the decision, and guess what? We're getting more throughput on that road even today. Now, those decisions, the decisions we made on that road, were made using manual studies. Just imagine if we were able to optimize the transportation system we have today and make those decisions instantaneously. Now, let me help you walk a little further here. Now, think about it. My old way of thinking would have meant we would have had to acquire more right-of-way on the road, which would have been a huge expense. We would have had to go construct a new lane on each side, which would have been a new expense, probably adding more tax dollars to the cost. But the solution that our engineers came up with was less than $100,000 of striping the road differently than it had been striped before, essentially. And so what I'm basically explaining to you, and I can't make this case for 100% of US transportation problems, but what I can say to you is that if you take all of the dollars we spend in our transportation system today, there's a good amount of it that is not being optimized because we're using the old way of thinking and not integrating what these great people are helping us understand. In some ways, I think what Informs really is a little bit like Jack Nicholson in the movie, I'm losing the movie now, the Tom Cruise movie where, he's basically saying you can't handle the truth. That's what you all are telling us. We can't handle the truth. But if we listen to the truth, we would make better decisions as practitioners. Now, we did an exercise at the US DOT called Beyond Traffic, where we actually tried to look at the entire field of play in US transportation and understand what's really going on in our system. Why are we seeing travel times go up? Why is this generation of young people likely to be the first generation that has longer travel times than we had? Why is that happening? Well, some of it has to do with certain shifts in behaviors and certain challenges within the system that we can identify and predict and probably solve if we actually listen to what the data told us. Let me just tell you a couple of those things. First of all, in personal mobility, you've got these huge demographic swings that are happening. The millennials are now more populous than the boomers. And those two groups are going to be the tastemakers for transportation over the next 20 years or so. They both like to be closer in to our cities and our urban cores. They both want to be in places where they have lots of transportation choices, where they can get on a bike or walk, as well as getting a car, maybe share. The millennials have the lowest percentage of driver's licensing of any generation we've seen since the car came online. We think that'll continue. They're more interested in buying the trip than they are buying the car. And so these challenges, these opportunities for us are game-changing if we pay attention to them. At the same time, U.S. transportation policy has more or less been stuck in the 1950s. We still have a highway trust fund.
Just drop it in a pocket.
The trust fund is still more or less focused on a build-out scenario, and we have not been thinking carefully about which assets we don't need in the future, which could be a game changer for this country.
I'm getting one more donut. And
One other, Laura mentioned UPS. I think we're starting to see, and we've seen for quite a while, the private sector is doing a far more aggressive job of taking analytics and using optimization strategies to work around the problems of congestion, much more so than the government typically is doing. And I'll explain a little bit of why I think the government has some challenges on that. But Orion was actually something I was going to talk about. One thing about Orion and UPS, 1 mile off of every route of the UPS system is a $50 million savings to UPS. And so they've figured out that if they can use these systems to make their systems work better, make their drivers move faster, shave off a little distance, that actually creates a savings to the company. 5 minutes of savings across the whole system is $100 million savings to UPS. So if the private sector can do this, why can't government do this? Now let me get a little deeper into government nerddom here. The U.S. government has had a long-standing policy of building transportation assets and then transferring those assets to someone else to manage. And that has worked for the Transcontinental Railroad, worked for the interstate highway system. You're starting to even see it work in commercial spaceflight. But the challenge with it is that it creates governance challenges and management challenges that ends up disaggregating decision making. So many of our transit systems are run at the local level. Many of those transit systems can tell you today how many of their buses and trains are running on schedule versus not, what the maintenance challenges are within those systems. But that information is not readily available even at the federal level. So the operations people know it, but our governance systems don't know it. Our aviation system is actually managed in the back office by the FAA, but as you know, there are commercial providers of these services, and there's a public-private partnership that actually has served us very well in terms of sharing information between government and the private sector. But you look at our freight systems, which are largely private, you look at our interstate system, which is mostly managed by the state governments. Everyone's in charge of our system and no one's in charge of it. And as a result, the data sits in places and doesn't get as utilized as it possibly could be. So I happen to think that over time, we have a big mission, a big challenge, and a big opportunity for an organization like the Bureau of Transportation Statistics to play an outsized role in helping the federal government become more acutely aware of all the data that's out there, using not only government data but outside data to ensure that we're getting up-to-the-minute information and actually being able to use that information in shaping policy decisions and choices. There was one other point that I wanted to make before I close out, and that has to do with the Smart City Challenge. This was, for us at USDOT, one of a mission of great love and great interest, but also of great importance. If you think about the combination of all of the different transportation technologies that are now being discussed, whether it's actual data and analytics, whether it's autonomous vehicles, whether it's trying to solve last mile problems, there are a host of issues that we're facing across the system. And our thought experiment was, can we implement some type of challenge to focus cities across the country on actually trying to solve those challenges using up-to-the-date technology and solutions? So we cobbled together $40 million out of our research budget, and we basically opened the door to medium-sized cities across the country to compete. We got more than 70 applications, and what I'm proudest of with respect to this challenge is that the application process required these cities to basically inventory everything that they're doing, to think about how they can use technology, data, analytics to solve their problems. And each of them came up with a version of a plan to actually do that. And those plans are still there, and many of the cities that competed for those dollars are implementing those plans even if they did not win the challenge. And that was actually the point. But let me talk to you about Sorry, Krishna, in Columbus, Columbus, Ohio, which Nick, which won the challenge. You know, what we did in this challenge was we weren't prescriptive. We didn't tell the cities you have to use a certain technology or a certain solution. What we did was we said, we want to see your plan for your community, how you would attack things like congestion. How would you attack things like climate change? How would you attack things like even equity in the context of using transportation technology? And Columbus gave us a beautiful proposal. It had aspects of freight. They're one of the shoulders of freight movements, particularly trucking in the country. They gave us a great idea of how they would use autonomous vehicles, and they're actually rolling out some of their autonomous solutions today, how they would use electric vehicles and so forth. And along the way, as we were doing this challenge, what we started to do is we started to compile partners. By the end of it, we had almost $100 million of partnerships that we brought to the table. Columbus brought another $400 million. And by the end of it, the $40 million we invested had generated $500 million in combined public and private dollars to help drive innovation in Columbus. Now, one of the unique aspects of their proposal was in Columbus, they have 4 times the national infant mortality rate. And this has been a problem predating the challenge. But they decided this was an opportunity for them to address it. And so one of the solutions they've developed is an app that will help mom create a trip to her doctor using the transit system. If she doesn't have a bank account, she can use cash to access the app. If she doesn't have a phone, a mobile phone, there will be kiosks in some of the higher dense areas where this problem is particularly acute. And so the takeaway for me is that cities, regions can be drivers in shaping the solutions that our technology companies come up with. In other words, I don't think the future is going to be as bright if cities and regions, and frankly, the US government is encouraging off-the-shelf solutions. I think it's going to be more bespoke, and that cities and regions can actually help us draw a picture of how technology can be maximally useful to people. And I want to leave with that point, which is that when we think about optimization and improving systems, I think ultimately in transportation at least, we're really talking about building community. We're talking about building places we live. We're talking about making these places better for people. And I think if we end up with a future where the only variable we focus on is travel times, that's actually going to be, I think, the worst possible outcome. I think there are going to be qualitative measures that we have to build into our systems as we think about how to make our society better. And I think Columbus's example in the Smart City Challenge is a very good milestone for that. So with that, I'm delighted to be here this morning. I don't know if I have any extra time, but if I do, I'm happy to take questions if you guys want, or we can just keep it moving. So, yeah.
One or two questions.
Sure. Good. This is impromptu. I don't think they were ready for me to ask questions. Sure.
Sir, were you able to collect best practices from all of those plans with respect to something that could then be distributed to more of the cities?
Yes. One of the work products of the Smart City Challenge is actually a set of best practices, because the challenge is still in the process of being implemented. So Columbus is rolling out steady pieces of its work. That product will be a couple of years in development, but you'll start to see not only in Columbus, but I know that in places like Pittsburgh, in San Francisco, other cities, Austin, other cities that were in the final group, I know that there are going to be other outputs from those processes as well. I'm also happy to see that other organizations have taken up the mantle on this to some extent. I know Bloomberg and other organizations have actually created smart city consortia out there, and I think that's also a very positive development. No one can corner the market on this stuff at this point. I think we're all learning, and so the more learning there is going on out there, I think the better. Yeah.
First, I want to thank you for your service at the Department of Transportation. When I was at the Department of Energy, we worked a fair amount with your staff, and they were just really terrific. The careers. You know, we're talking a lot about how to use data,
Yeah.
but I know at Energy, and I wonder if you have a comment at Transportation, do you find we're actually collecting the data as well and in the form that we can use it best? Because, you know, it's only going to be, the analysis is only going to be as good as what goes in, and we certainly found a lot of gaps at Energy. I thought maybe you might have some comments
Yeah.
on Transportation.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I alluded to it, but maybe to put a finer point, the short answer is no. The data is being collected somewhere, but literally in the federal transportation world, we put money into transit systems, for example, for their capital needs. The operating side is not supported by the federal government largely, and so it's invisible to us. Now, we will get data over time that'll tell us how many accidents happened with a particular transit vehicle we purchased, how the maintenance schedules are going with that transit vehicle. We'll even get data that shows like how the transit system is basically working. But just to give you a sense, Waze knows more about real-time information than I ever knew as Transportation Secretary about how the overall system's performing. And I really think that's a problem. And you know, one of the challenges BTS has is that it basically works within a framework that Congress has set. And so there's certain ways the information has to be collected, certain ways the information has to be culled and disseminated. And I actually think that is a problem long term. So yeah, we definitely have some challenges with how we collect information. And by the way, government is paying for these systems to exist, but we don't have the back channel. I want to say one last thing before I walk off. One of the aspects of information that I'm most excited about is that it allows us, you know, information allows us to actually talk on a common platform. And in transportation, which affects all of us, these systems are so intricate, and frankly, in the US, our biggest challenge isn't building end-to-end systems. It's more integrating those systems and making them work more as fingers on the hand as opposed to individual fingers. I think one of the biggest challenges, though, is that as we learn more, as we get more information, is actually listening to what that information tells us. I had a chance when I was trying to get the long-term surface transportation bill passed. I spent time with people on the whole spectrum. And I don't think you will mind me saying this, but I sat down, had a nice breakfast with Grover Norquist, you know, he said to me, he said, you know, it's real simple. You know, roads are for Republicans and transit is for Democrats. And, you know, I think that if that's the frame through which we look at how to solve our transportation problems, we're going to be in a real fix, because in reality, even our rural areas are connected to suburban areas, which are connected to urban areas, and the economies of these places are all interconnected. And so if the transportation systems are not seamless and flow well, we're going to have big problems. And so, you know, what I hope is that convenings such as this give us a common frame of reference so that we can actually look in a fairly undistilled fashion at what we're actually doing as a country when it comes to policy. And I think there are things we're paying for that we shouldn't, and there are things that we're not paying for that we should, but we won't get there until we have the kind of work that's being done by this group. So I really want to thank you so much for what you're doing, and hopefully we will solve our problems. And you know, Grover's. I actually enjoyed the breakfast, by the way. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people here. My name is Nick Hall. I'm the 2018 President of Informs, and I also I work at the Fisher College of Business as Distinguished Professor of Operations at The Ohio State University. We've heard a lot about Columbus, and I'm delighted to hear all that. And let me start by saying that was a wonderful presentation by Secretary Foxx about smart cities and the role of OR and analytics. On March the 20th, you may know that the administration released its management agenda. And the management agenda emphasizes the federal government's need to maximize the use of data and analytics, the things that we do, to support policymakers' decision-making processes. And here's a quote, smarter use of data and evidence is needed to orient decisions and accountability around service and results. So that's what so many of us are thinking about. From the other side of the aisle, similar sentiments, which again I'll quote, government cannot rely on outdated systems to meet today's rapidly changing needs and critical challenges, and reforms can be taken to, quote, provide more effective and responsive solutions. And of course, that's why we're here today. Those of you in this room or watching online and other leaders and senior managers in Washington need to understand how a robust, holistic approach to the use of data, but in this case particularly through operations research and analytics, can present solutions to the government's most complicated and important challenges. So today's summit is a small glance and introduction into OR and analytics. Informs looks forward to serving as a resource to you and your peers as you contemplate these opportunities and challenges moving forward. And just as a side note, there's so much going on at Informs. We have 5,500 people presenting interesting and novel work at our conference this year in Phoenix in November. So anyway, our next speaker, who I'm introducing, knows many things about some of the most pressing challenges facing the United States. It's my pleasure to introduce General Michael Hayden, the former director of both the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency. As director of the Central Intelligence Agency, he was on the front line of geopolitics and the war on tenure and the war on terror. During his tenure at the National Security Agency, the longest in the agency's history, he worked to put a human face on the famously secretive agency. He's also the principal deputy director of national intelligence, the highest-ranking military intelligence officer in the country. And in that role, he oversaw the entire intelligence community. General Hayden served for nearly 40 years in the U.S. Air Force, in senior staff positions at the Pentagon U.S. European Command and the National Security Council. He's currently a principal at the Chertoff Group and is distinguished visiting professor at George Mason University School of Public Policy. He's also a frequent commentator on major news developments and in top publications. His recent memoir, Playing to the Edge, American Intelligence in the Age of Terror, was a New York Times bestseller and selected as one of the 100 most notable books of 2016. So please join me in welcoming General Michael Hayden.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Nick. So thanks for the chance to come chat. I caught some parts of the Secretary's commentary, and it really struck me. He's using words that I have on this yellow legal pad here about fact-based, evidence-based, influencing policy, and so on. So I'll be coming at this from my background, all right, intelligence, and pretty much at the national level. All right, and so I guess I won't be commenting specifically on the current state of the art within your discipline, but more broadly commenting on the importance of your discipline for the broader society, and not just narrowly defined government, really not just even narrowly defined government decision making. So let me put that as preface, and then if I do this really well, I'll leave time for questions and comments, and we'll have a conversation. So let me just kind of, since I'm the intel guy here, all right, let me just kind of level set the global situation in terms of why this is a really important time. Okay, and then I'll get into how do we decide things as a nation? How do we make policy? Okay, so level set the global situation. Obviously, this is going to be the speed reel, the highlight reel, not the fine print. But let me begin. A little more than 2 years ago now, I was up the BW Parkway. I was up in Baltimore, and the Republicans were having their offsite. They do this every February. They come back early from a break. They picked Philadelphia, Baltimore. This year they went out, tried to go out to the Greenbrier. Remember, that's when the train in which they were all riding? Yeah, that's the event. So it's all the Republican members of Congress get together, trying to create strongly unified Republican positions on key issues. Okay, I'll let that sit for a minute. Okay, and so I was up there on the panel for national security. Mike Chertoff, former Secretary of Homeland Security. Rio Odierno, former Chief Staff, just left Chief Staff of America's Army. Ryan Crocker, Ambassador to everywhere tough. He's been ambassador to, he has been as a Foreign Service officer in Beirut, Islamabad, Kabul, and Baghdad. The last three as ambassador. Me and Bob Kagan. Bob is Brookings historian, very, very highly regarded. So we're there, and you're all very, I saw you as a secretary, you're very polite, very quiet. Republicans not that way for their offsite, okay? So first of all, I just told you there are 5 people on a panel. And so if you watch CNN after 7 o'clock at night, you know that 5 people was way too many people for a panel. Okay? So we're doing this, and we're getting questions from the moderator, and then they were asking questions through the moderator, and then they started skipping the moderator and coming right to us, and then they started yelling at one another, okay? So it was really getting interactive. At which point, Bob Kagan, the Brookings historian, right? He kind of levitates out of his chair, puts his arms like Moses coming down from Sinai, and says, look, what's going on here is the melting down of the post-World War II American liberal Bretton Woods World Bank IMF world order. Get it? I remember thinking at the time, damn, Kagan, that's good. and fundamentally, that is the American-based international security structure. Created by American statecraft, motivated by American ideals, sustained by American investment of both power and resources for 75 years. And by the way, we all get together here again in 300 years, and we look back on those 75 years. We as a nation are going to get more than a gentleman's C. We are going to get good grades. We did well with that. Despite all the troubles, most peaceful, most productive, most long-lived, richest, healthiest, best educated 75 years in the history of the species. Okay. But it's going away because the world on which it was based is no longer that world. Remember, 45, 47, 50, 51, industrial era, manufacturing, linear processes, and now it's not that anymore, is it? And so the relevance of this naturally eroding. And so that leads to a whole bunch of hot spots. I'll just kind of rattle them off, all right? But the fundamental issue is this is fundamental. Okay? It's just not Korea. It's just not, okay? It's a whole shift of the international order. But when I do this in the long form, and I actually done this twice now in the last week, once in Huntsville, Alabama, and the other one in Wheeling, West Virginia. All right? And I have slides, and I put up five things to fret about. Okay? And I say not in order of importance, but in order of speed. How fast are they coming down the pike at us? All right? And I begin with Korea. And of course, we've got the summit, maybe, on the 12th of June. And the fact-based guys, and now we're getting into the core here, and the fact-based guys, my old tribe, I mean, we are firmly of the belief he's never going to zero. He would actually have to be crazy to go to zero. And so how does that fact-based thing influence what it is we expect, our expectations and so on? The next one coming down the pike, not surprisingly, the Iranians. And we're the ones stimulating that. We ripped up the deal. Okay? That may be a good idea or a bad idea, but again, the fact-based guys' views are that they were further away from a weapon with the deal than they are without it. We knew more about the program with the deal than we do without it, and they're not cheating. That's the facts. Made a decision. Third one I usually get to is terrorism, and here I give good marks to 3 successive presidents, Bush, Obama, and Trump, for doing good, tough things to make us safer. You know, we'll never be totally safe, but we are far better off than we have been at some times in our past, and I mentioned that. Then I get to the fun-loving Russians. Okay, remember, this is how long is the fuse, not how bad it could be. And I talk about actually again the fact-based guys. You realize these guys aren't resurgent, right? You realize that they're revanchists, but they're not resurgent. At this point, I throw up a graph that it's just 2 bars. One's the gross domestic product of California, the other is the gross domestic product of Russia. Russia is a fraction of the GDP of the American state of California. And we kind of weave that reality into, so why does he act the way he does? I was on Morning Joe a couple of years back now, and he had done something. We were complaining. And I'm down here in D.C., and they're up in New York. And they're about ready to break for commercial. And I go, hey, Joe, before you go, can I say one more thing? Yeah, General, what do you got? I said, Joe, you realize he's doing all this stuff, and he didn't have more than a pair of 7s in his hand, right? Really, General? Yeah, Joe, and 7s win if nobody calls. So, fact-based reality. By the way, I'm not making this up. These are all kind of intelligence community judgments. Then the 5th, remember I said there'd be 5, is China. All right, and again, I hesitate, again, trying to be fact-based, to mention China in the same breath as some of these other things. My mantra is China's not an enemy. There are no good reasons for China to be an enemy. This should be a manageable relationship, competitive, oh my God, but never has to get to the level of conflict and talk about Chinese weaknesses and structural problems that the People's Republic has to face. So those are big deals, okay? And now we're trying to deal with those big deals in an American culture, okay, in an American culture that the Oxford Dictionary's Word of the Year for 2016, I think, really adequately describes. The Oxford Dictionary's Word of the Year for 2016 was post-truth. Okay? Post-truth, it broadly defined as decision-making based on something, let me be careful, decision-making based less on fact, data, evidence, and more based on feeling, emotion, preference, loyalty, tribe, grievance. Okay, and it is. I'm going to build a 3-layer cake here. All right, but it is a 3-layer cake, and I'm obviously going to talk a little bit about the administration, and I'll do so respectfully. All right, but the basic layer is not the administration. Basic layer is you, me, and our neighbors, and as a broader society, we have kind of moved into this tribal loyalty as a way of making decisions as opposed to data. And so that an argument now, discussion now, with someone who disagrees with us becomes very quickly an attack on identity rather than an argument over fill in the blank, what data point that you want to describe. I have a second book out. Came out about 3 weeks ago. It's called The Assault on Intelligence, American National Security in an Age of Lies. And it's actually doing well too. It's on the same list as the other one was on, so that's good. And as part of the research for that, I drove up to Pittsburgh, which was my hometown, and told my brother to fill the back end of the Rochester Sports Bar with all of his crazy friends, which he did, most of whom are relatives, okay? And it was kind of this, what are you people thinking? Because these were, by and large, supporters of the president, and frankly, most of the people I talk to down here aren't. I mean, we just kind of divided that way up as a nation, right? And it was fascinating. I'll give you one example, all right? And this is not meant to be judgmental, because these literally are my neighbors, These are people I grew up with. But I said, how many of you really think that Barack Obama wiretapped Trump Tower? Really? You know, I'm the former director of NSA. I know something about this. Okay. And frankly, my guys would have never done that. And frankly, the plumbing doesn't work that way. It would be really hard for them to do that. So what evidence do you have? One woman, kind of about where you guys are, said something, and then not everyone, but I got a lot of north-south bobbing here, all right? I said, what makes you believe that? And she just said, Obama. See what I mean by post-truth? Feeling, preference, emotion, tribe, loyalty, grievance. You know, almost as if it really doesn't matter whether it happened or not. It's still true. Okay. And now, frankly, told you, you know, a little political here. We had a president, I think, who brilliantly recognized that as a candidate, all right, and played to that mode of thinking for many Americans. I mean, you just look at the language of the campaign, all right. And frankly, as president, I think some of the things he does, but a lot of things he says, keeps playing to that and keeps driving us. Number one, keeps dividing us. And I think the fundamental argument from the administration is not to argue the facts, it's to discredit the other side. And we see that rather broadly, which is the height of post-truth and the opposite, I think, of where your discipline leads. But I said it's a three-layer cake. So you got all of us, and you got what's happening at the political level, and then you've got a foreign intervention. Right? You have a third party jumping into the American information space, into the American social media space, designed to manipulate the first and second layers. And so back to your overall discipline. I mean, look, what I just described for you should disturb any modern democracy, all right? But it should really disturb this one. Sorry. You realize our founding documents are written by those fellows across the river, you know, Madison and the gang. Mason, Hamilton, okay, New Yorker. Those people were all Enlightenment scholars. Those people had read the philosophy of the Enlightenment, which frankly is the way we in the West have been thinking about thinking since the 17th century. Data, evidence, humility in the face of complexity, hypothesis, test, reassessment, moving forward. And so that truth-basedness is actually more core to how our government functions than it would be in a parliamentary democracy or even a benign monarchy. It's the truth-basedness. And so it puts a great deal of things at risk for us. Let me give you a couple of examples, and I want to make sure I'm staying on time here. Again, it sounds mildly critical, but it's just a good example. Remember the Muslim ban, not a Muslim ban? Well, maybe it was a Muslim ban, I don't know. Remember that? And it came out of the language of the campaign, right? And the president issued an executive order that's now been argued. The third iteration argued in front of the Supreme Court, all right? That was based on campaign language. And the campaign language was that refugees represent an apocalyptic threat to the United States. And the current American system for vetting refugees was totally dystopian, neither of which are fact-based. And it led to a policy that many people like me found harmful, all right? There have been amicus briefs to the court based upon the executive order. 5 former directors or acting directors of the CIA, 2 deputy directors of the CIA, a director of national intelligence, and a director of the National Counterterrorism Center all joined the amicus brief. And none of our successors can you find on the record stating publicly support for the ban. I mean, obviously they legitimately owe silence or loyalty unless specifically asked by Congress, and don't go out there and campaign. But those of us who were free. And we opposed it on 3 grounds. One was, frankly, epistemological. I mean, it was back to the core of your work. It's not based on facts. We can't get in that habit. Second, we opposed it because it just fell unevenly on the world's least fortunate people. And then finally, we actually thought not only was it unnecessary and unkind, it was dangerous. Because the narrative of the order is the narrative of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which is there is undying enmity between Islam and the West. So it's beyond useless, beyond unkind. It actually probably pumped up the other guy's story. All right, that's what I mean by non-fact-based decision making. Let me give you one more example of non-fact-based, and then how maybe an example of how the fact-based guys are supposed to create boundaries. Right? Take a knee. Got okay. Echoes coming up here. NFL, football. Yeah. Okay. So the president is in Huntsville, Alabama, last Friday in September, and he's just giving a stem-winder campaign-style speech. I mean, just campaign speech. That's fine. But he hits upon a new theme. And it's the NFL players taking a knee and disrespecting the anthem. Now, for God's sake, Alabama, red, crimson tide, football. I mean, there is hardly a topic that you could not bring up that would be more red blood, raw meat for an Alabama Republican rally. So the president talks about taking a knee, and the owners ought to fire those SOBs, except he didn't use initials, and so on. Before President Trump got to D.C. on Air Force One, the leading hashtags, the trending hashtags in Russian-controlled botnets were NFL, take a knee, and as somebody who studied languages a little bit, the most difficult thing to translate are definite articles because they're different rhythms. It was NFL, take a knee, and take the knee was the third. I don't think that's an American. And by the way, the Russians were playing both ends. All right, they were taste great, less filling. They were patriotic and free speech because they didn't care. The Russian themes were then echoed, I'm not saying they were handed off, but they were then echoed by alt-right media here in the United States. Alex Jones, InfoWars, Gateway Pundit, and frankly, it went real racial real fast. One of that's because of the demographics of the NFL, okay? Another is, I mentioned I'm a Pittsburgher. You recall what happened to the Steelers that weekend? They were playing in Chicago. They decided we can't get team unanimity, so we're not going out. Actually, a Pittsburgher would say, we're not going out, okay? And Alejandro Villanueva, the blindside tackle, West Point grad, Army Special Forces, moved, and the team knew it, moved far enough to the runway so he could see the flag. Remember the iconic picture of Alejandro? Yeah. And the picture goes viral, and the alt-right then uses the picture to feed their narrative because who's the Steelers coach? Mike Tomlin, African-American coach. Then it bleeds over here to Fox News, usually via Hannity, and then it makes its way to the non-news portions of Fox News. It gets to the curvy couch in the morning for Fox and Friends, and guess who watches it and tweets it? Okay. Now that's a very political story. It's not untrue. All right. It is exactly what happened, and I'm not suggesting any judgments on any. By the way, that is not collusion. Okay. That is what I call convergence. Everybody did it for their own purposes. The president, campaign rally. The Russians, they want to mess with your heads. Okay. The alt-right, they're conspiratorial. Fox, ratings. But do you see, here's the theme, not judging anybody in that cycle. The theme is look how powerfully non-fact-based issues were created and reinforced by the current dynamics of our society. By the way, I counted 1,750 athletes suit up for the NFL every weekend. The number who did not stand at attention for the anthem the Sunday before the Huntsville speech, 6. Again, appeal to emotion, feeling, preference, tribe, loyalty, grievance, not to data. So let me talk a little bit about data, guys. So I'm going to do this in intelligence terms, but I think it applies to scientists and scholars and yourselves as well. I always talk about, the intel guys got to get into the Oval, all right? And in the Oval, the intel guys got to get into the head of the president. That's a requirement. And it's our job. I mean, it's nice when the president helps, but it doesn't matter. We got to get in the head of the president. So we got to get in the Oval. Metaphorically, I'm talking about what it is you all do, about how do I get data into the head of a decision maker. But we go into the Oval through a different door. That's a metaphor too. We actually go through the same door. But we go in the Oval through a different door than the president. Our door is marked facts. The president's door, quite legitimately, is marked vision. The one you voted for. Fact, vision. World as it is, world as we want it to be. Fact, vision, as is, want to be. Inherently inductive, data, you know this, going to generalized conclusions. Absolutely deductive, first principles, again, the one you voted for. How do I apply them to a specific circumstance? Fact, vision, as is, want to be, inductive, deductive. For Intel, I think it's for you too. For Intel, we trend pessimistic, okay? Policymaker trends optimistic. Otherwise, they would not have interviewed with you to get the job if they couldn't figure they could make it better. And so you've got this built-in tension anyway, right? And we do that with every president. Now, frankly, it was probably easiest with Bush 41. And you know why? He used to come in the other door. Yeah, he used to be CIA director. I suspect with a President Clinton, it would have been fairly easy, only because she had been Secretary of State for 4 years, and kind of going through the drill. I mean, my imagineering of what the first briefing was like would be her saying, "So where were we?" Okay. We always knew that with a President Trump, it was going to be more difficult, because these characteristics over here, the president had more full measure than any other president we've seen. I mean, President Trump is spontaneous, prone to action, intuitive, almost a preternatural self-confidence in his own a priori narrative of how things work. And so we always knew it was going to be hard. It is a great national tragedy. Now here I'm talking about my tribe, not generally yours. It's a great national tragedy that the first time we had to try to do that Vulcan mind meld thing was on an issue that other Americans were using to challenge his legitimacy as president, the Russian interference. That is a perfect storm and a national tragedy. And it made it much more difficult for we fact-based guys to get into the head of this president. But it is that fact-based instinct thing, that fact-based post-truth thing is actually a generalized condition now in our society. If you look at the current friction points, okay, between what the Secretary talked about, national policy making, right? If you look at the current friction points between, I'll just use the word administration, all right, and the broader society, where are they? Intelligence, law enforcement, courts, science, scholarship, and journalism. And what do all those have in common? Well, number one, they're all imperfect. Number two, they all occasionally get things wrong. But number three, they're all evidence-based. They're all fact-based. And their only safe haven is data, is truth. They can't survive. There's no other harbor for them over the long term. So let me end where I began. All right. I wish you great luck in your discipline and in your craft and tactics, what we call tactics, techniques, procedures, and best practices, and so on. But holding the ground collectively for fact-based, evidence-based policymaking is more important than just whatever it is you are focused on. It is about holding the ground about how we as a society more broadly make decisions about everything. And with that, I will stop and entertain any questions that any of you might have.
Thank you. I'm only on page 170 of the book, so I don't know if it's going to come later. But and thank you, by the way, for documenting all that has happened so that we can look back on it later. But where are we going to get hope that there's some leadership that's going to take care of making sure that we keep true to facts and to data? Because it seems that our education system isn't necessarily stepping up to the plate, and civics education, et cetera, particularly at the middle school and high school level, is just not there. So,
right.
Some hope.
So that's why I begin with the cake. And I say the biggest layer is this, all right? Because whatever you may or may not think of current governance, it's the one we deserve. All right. It is reflective of changing attitudes, movements, thoughts in the broader population. So I agree that it's just not was H.R. McMaster a better national security advisor than John Bolton will be? That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer, but that's an important question. But more fundamentally, how is it we view one another? How is it we treat one another? And I do treat in the book and I actually really got out of my comfort zone. This is not just a book about intelligence. It's about this broader stuff, particularly in the first layer of the cake. And I talk to philosophers and historians and so on, and I quote David Brooks, who, New York Times, who says that with the loss of identity of other things that identify us, family, neighborhood, church, and so on, we have transferred the kinds of loyalties we once had to those institutions to our political preferences. J.D. Vance, Hillbilly Elegy. Yeah. I read the book and I had a chance to chat with him a little bit. He talks about how we are divided by where we go Friday night with the family for dinner. You can almost predict political preferences based on Applebee's or somewhere else. He also makes a distinction who's got basic cable and who's got premium. Yeah, seriously. I mean, so we have divided and again transferred these loyalties so that so when I'm in there in the back room in Pittsburgh and I'm walking really softly because I know all these folks and have the highest regard for them. By the way, there were more veterans and parents of veterans in that room than have been in any green room or boardroom I've ever been in. So let's remember who we're talking about here. All right. The strongly held beliefs, and I spent a lot of time in the book talking about how the winds of globalization have been at my back for the 50 years since I left Pittsburgh, and for many of the people in that room, the winds of globalization were in their face. And I said, what does America first mean to you? Oh, easy. Someone's paying attention to me. Was the answer I got. So these are broader, deeper societal, and I agree totally, educational challenges. Yep, over here. But again, plays directly into your craft. All right, how do you find an audience for your craft if we make decisions based on something other than data?
Hi, General. I'm Toy Zaban from MIT, and I want to ask you a question about information warfare.
Yep.
So a lot of my work looked at ISIS and Twitter, what they were doing, Russian bots on Twitter, what they were doing. What I felt was that the government's response on the social media space didn't feel like it's at the level of the opposition here. And so what I asked you was, working inside the Intel community, what are we doing on the information warfare space to develop social network countermeasures for these non-state actors and state actors?
So, yeah, great question, and I'll try to give you a really efficient answer because there's a lot to be said. There's some low-hanging fruit, obviously, that we can do. Number one, political advertising in social media should be regulated the way it is in broadcast media. I mean, that's easy. I would not suppress information, okay? That's certainly not by the government. But a lot of good folks have talked about a Rotten Tomatoes system for news sites, okay, that you actually crowdsource an evaluation based on certain criteria. All right, how long has it been up? Does it have original work, or is it all recopied? Does it have a preference? Who pays for it? And so on. So, for example, I've actually seen movies with a Rotten Tomatoes rating of 35, but I knew what I was getting into. It was my, it was my fault, and so I think that might be good. Fundamentally, though, and it may actually be the nature of social media. So I went to Sweden in December. The Nobel Committee was having a day-long seminar on truth. So just think how weird that is. Okay? The director of America's Central Intelligence Agency is invited by the Nobel Committee to come to Sweden to give a 12-minute TED Talk on truth in the 21st century. That's how things are going on. And I did my thing, and it was fine, but I really went there to learn. And I listened to a woman, Zeynep Tufekci, Turkish by birth, North Carolinian by choice. And she is an expert on social media. And she says it's the algorithm. Okay? You ask, how do we solve this, right? So her motto is social media is like eating Doritos. Can't eat one. Because the first one gives you salt and fat, which automatically creates a craving for salt and fat. And so you go into a social media account, okay, and the goal of the algorithm, which is, that's what drives it. The goal of the algorithm is to keep you on site. The goal of the algorithm is you keep clicking. And so the algorithm knows you better than you know you. The algorithm shows you stuff that you're going to find supportive, okay? And the longer you stay on that site, the algorithm's essence drives you more in the direction of reinforcing what it is you've already identified you prefer. In other words, you don't see the internet. You see a dark corner of your own ghetto in the internet as the algorithm drives you away from the center and more firmly into your predetermined beliefs. There's a guy named McNamee who wrote an article in The Atlantic about 4 months ago, who was an early investor in Facebook and a mentor for Zuckerberg, who says exactly what I just said. He says, we did it wrong. It's the algorithm. And then you've got a foreign actor coming in that just accelerates all of that. But it is fundamentally in the algorithm. It's how it was constructed. And so it's probably back to the algorithm. Any others? Oh, yeah, yes, ma'am. Here comes the mic.
Julie Swan, North Carolina State. So I hear your thought-provoking message that we're in the era of post-truth, and I hear what I think is your message to us, which is to continue focusing on data and evidence. I wonder if you have any strategies that can help us with that in this era of post-truth.
Yeah. So for the Intel guy, all right, again, I've got to speak from my life experience. I rarely went in there with a syllogism. Well, good morning, President Bush, whereas, and he goes, well, hell, Mike, therefore. Okay, hardly ever. I found it to be a good day when I could create the left and the right-hand boundaries of legitimate policy discussion, recognizing that there were indeed other legitimate inputs to a policymaker's decision-making beyond the cold, rational, calculating logic that I was giving him or her. And so I would compete, I would strive to do the left and right hand boundaries, so that you're able to say, you realize if you're over here, you're dividing by 0, right? Okay? Or if you realize over here, you've made an assumption that water runs uphill. Right? It cannot work. I'll give you an example. 2006, Iraq, Baghdad looks like one of Dante's circles of hell. And the president's policy is not working. And so we are struggling to come up with a new policy. And it ends up in the surge. All right, we send 5 brigades into Baghdad. Our view was, I don't know. You put 5 brigades of independent combat, independent, nonpartisan, non-sectarian, professional combat power into Baghdad, fewer people are going to die. That's good. You're going to make it a safer city at some expense to us and our young people, but you're going to make it a safer city. But that's not your goal. That's a way station on the goal. The idea here is to give Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, the Prime Minister of Iraq, sufficient space for him to be what we need him to be, which is the Prime Minister of Iraq, not the Prime Minister of the Dawa Party or of only Iraqi Shia. And we said, and it's kind of compressed in time and space, but our view to the president was, that's not a high probability shot. This guy is, he thinks there's a Ba'athist behind every bush trying to kill him, because for most of his life there was a Ba'athist behind every bush trying to kill him. He spent most of his life in exile. And now you want him to act in a way almost uber generous to these other factions. That's a hard one. So left and right hand boundaries, right? And the president said, got it, send the brigades. And my picturing of it was, he was right about here. Okay? I mean, water wasn't running uphill, it wasn't dividing by 0, but he was pretty close. And then the president said, and set up a private video conference between me and Maliki every week for the rest of the administration, where I will try to do personal coaching, mentoring, cajoling, threatening to get him to be what we want. And so I guess the answer is, I don't want to say moderate your expectations, but be realistic with your expectations. There are other genuine inputs to a mayor, a governor, a senator, all right? But keep the decision within the left and right hand boundaries of possibilities. And be prepared to say, you're outside here. No matter what you do, that will not work. And keep the discussion like that. By the way, it makes me sound less didactic, less finger pointing, less, it's easier to talk to people if you're not saying, I got the answer and you don't, so you need to line up. Any others? Yes, sir.
This may be an age-old solution to a problem, but I think you were close to it on communications. I mean, one of the striking things I got from your comment was when you spoke to the people in the bar, and when you said, hey, I ran NSA, I know something about how you do it, and they nod their heads, now they get it. I don't know if I can speak for Informs, but I was last year's president of the American Statistical Association, and we have the same problem in how we communicate stuff. So the rule I always use is, it's not what we said, it's not what they heard, it's what they say they heard.
Yeah.
So if we can get it correct such that they can repeat it back, I think it works tremendous for the administration, for the public, for the journalists, so forth.
Absolutely. And one of the things I had from my senior leadership at CIA was, a little bit like what you just said, you're no longer responsible for just what you say. You're responsible for what they hear. And that's a bigger burden. So how do you do the argument in the face of people? Let me put it to you this way, all right? How do you make the compelling macroeconomic argument about X, Y, or Z to an individual who has suffered micro disadvantage from A, B, or C? I can get up here and say, oh, immigration, oh my God. We are a younger society, we are a more entrepreneurial society, we are a richer society, all right? And the food, don't even mention the food. I mean, but when I try that in the Ohio River Valley, not so much. And it's hard to. So that it's just not these are blindly prejudiced people. It's that their personal data set is at odds with your macro science. Yeah. I think that may be it. Well, yeah, did you have a question, ma'am? Go ahead. Thank you.
When you think about the challenges we have as institutions for intelligence.
Here's a microphone.
Oh, excuse me, thank you. How would you describe those skills that an organization like this can help reinforce for an intelligence organization that we can do more of to be of service?
Yeah. So thank you. Great question. Good one to end on. I mean, it is to a first order what I try to suggest throughout, not just your discipline, not just your craft, but the idea that we are better people if we make decisions based upon an objective view of reality. Now, we argue about what an objective view is. That's a different discussion. All right. My complaint is we're using it. We seem to be from time to time using as a departure point something that doesn't even claim to be an objective view of reality. It's an instinct, something sui generis. All right. So number one, you have to argue the objective view. A second, I guess, hidden lessons, not the obvious. And again, I did a little research over the weekend on exactly what your craft discipline and science does, and you go into data and let the data express itself and perhaps tell things that are not intuitive. Okay, this is probably going to sound silly to you. All right, but one of my jobs as a brigadier was for U.S. Forces Europe, the head of intelligence, and the war, not of choice, but the war was Bosnia. Okay, and horrible ethnic war, Croats, Serbs, Muslims, and we were trying to get a predictor. Things would pop up, and why is there fighting over here and not fighting over here, and so on. And do you know that one of the powerful correlations was? Altitude. And when you think about it, flatlanders, easy to move, more contact, more understanding. Higher you get, harder to get around. Ethnic identity becomes more crystallized because not obvious.
Like Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Yeah. And so there are things like that that can be very revealing. One of the problems, I'll end on this because I know you got to move on. One of the problems we have going in briefing intelligence is what's the plot line? And we can get the data down, but what's the plot line? What's really going on? I'll use Syria, but it's not a good example for this, but it just comes to mind. Syria is a humanitarian crisis. Syria is a war of Democrats against autocrats. Syria is all about terrorism. Syria is all about the Sunni-Shia split. Syria is all about the East-West competition between Russia and Europe. All those are true. Each of those would drive you in a different direction for policy. And so now, what is the main plot line? Put another way, what's really going on here? Okay, and very often it's the superficial story. I'm making this up, it's not fact-based, but a superficial story would be the air conditioning plant is closing in Indiana. Okay, that's the headline. Is that the story? Do you know what I mean? And it's easy to respond to the headline, and by the way, that may be the story. But then again, maybe it's not. Okay? Maybe there's something else that's going on. I'll give you one more example. I taught this a long time ago at ROTC. And there was a case study on African American promotion rates early in the integrated Army. Okay? And they were lagging. And of course, they study this, and oh my God, they're lagging. We've got to go fix this. And then they were trying to fix the problem at the promotion board, saying, you guys got to look at these African American officers better. I mean, Actually, though, when you dug beneath it, okay, separate but very related, African American officers were overly represented in the Transportation Corps. And their promotion rates in the Transportation Corps were actually significantly above average. But the Transportation Corps' promotion rates were below average. And so it wasn't a problem at the promotion board that seems to have been treating people quite in a standard way. It was personnel policy way back here upstream that, for whatever reason, bent this demographic into that career field. It's those kinds of hidden things that I think really would help. I mean, it would help in my business, you know. All right, I know you've got a lot more to do. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Cohen. I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Marketing for Informs, and on behalf of the organization, our members, thank you very much for being here. We heard a couple of really great presentations this morning talking about not just how OR and analytics save lives, save money, and solve problems, but how data can be transformed into information into insight that leads to better decision making. And as the General pointed out, not in a vacuum, right? The decisions, the information that's derived is layered with all kinds of complexity that policymakers, whether you're from the Hill or the administration or somewhere downtown, have to factor in. And it's a challenge. And our job at Informs is to become a resource for you, to connect you with the experts, so that as you're contemplating the decision-making process and the use of how OR and analytics can lead to better public policy outcomes, or at least the thinking about them and the more effective and efficient operation of government, we are here to be a resource for you. Moving on from here, we're going into 3 really interesting panel conversations. Those of you who are going to stay for the national security panel, that will take place in this room. The healthcare panel will be next door, and transportation will be down one floor on the 4th floor in the summit room. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Help yourself to some coffee or beverages. And if you have any questions about today's event, please feel free to reach out to me. My cards are in the packets that you received earlier this morning. And again, thank you all very much for taking time out of your day to be with us.